Welcome to College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by AT&T 5G.
One more week to make a playoff case. Championship weekend is looming. It's easy to think 4 teams are shoo-ins. Well, last weekend taught us just how quickly the shoe can be thrown to the other foot. Alabama and Notre Dame might have left footprints that are large enough that it really doesn't matter what they do this weekend. Ohio State and Clemson probably only have to avoid stubbing their toes. But the rest, lace them up tight. Spoilers are looming. Their sole mission, take a championship and maybe find a way to sneak into that playoff field if the shoe fits.
The season we never expected is nearing an end. So they have just one more week to earn a win and find a place. To appreciate through promise and pain.
No good! Florida is upset by LSU.
The power of a word we so often overlook. Now. That's all we have, and it's what they've earned. For all they've fought against, to have this second in time to know how they rank and where they stand.
Notre Dame knocks off number 1.
They may yet rise and fall, advance and recede. But in this instant, they've made it far enough to be counted and graded and placed.
Touchdown, Alabama!
They've made it to the only place any of us can really claim, and all of us should cherish. Now.
Earlier today in Grapevine, Texas, College Football Playoff Selection Committee getting together. Gary Barta, the chair, will join us a little later on to answer questions. One question was answered for itself on Saturday night when Florida did the faceplant against LSU and greatly jeopardized their opportunity to earn their way into the College Football Playoff by beating Alabama in the SEC Championship game. Glad to have you with us. College Football Playoff Top 25. These are the last rankings before the ones come out on Sunday. Exclusively noon Eastern time here on ESPN. You'll see them as soon as we do. Then we'll know who's going to be in the College Football Playoff. Joined, as always, by my partners, Kirk Herbstreit, David Pollack, Jesse Palmer, and Joey Galloway. So as we get started, let's look at the storylines going in to these penultimate rankings, ones right before the final ones. In the SEC, it'll be Alabama and Florida again. Crimson Tide took care of business. The Gators did not. You've seen the shoe throw. Game was lost well before the shoe throw, probably in practice during the week. The Gators put themselves in jeopardy. Rematch in the ACC. We're going to tell you how rare it is for a team to sweep and how rare it is for the second rematch of top 5 teams to be even close. Clemson and Notre Dame for the ACC championship. And in the Big Ten, Ohio State is in, only had to play 5 games to get there. Northwestern is probably kicking itself. Had they not stumbled against Michigan State, they probably would have been in a position to earn their way in to the College Football Playoff field. So, Kirk, what are you looking forward to seeing in these rankings where we expect the top 5 will be the same?
Yeah, I think we all agree, obviously, the top 5 is going to be the same without any big shakeups from last weekend. I think it's a little bit further down. You know, it's storylines like Coastal Carolina trying to narrow the gap on Cincinnati. It's where's Iowa State? You know, they made a big jump last week. What happens to Iowa State this week if there's chaos ahead of them this weekend? And I think even USC, the Pac-12, you know, we talked about that a little bit on game day last week. Just the fact that it's not pretty, but they continue to find ways to win games. I'm anxious to see what the committee thinks of Clay Helton's bunch after last weekend.
Now, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on after the rankings are revealed. Obviously, we haven't seen them, but now we can. College Football Playoff Top 25 brought to you by AT&T 5G. And look at San Jose State. The Spartans of Brent Brennan, who is a hot coaching commodity there in the Mountain West Championship game against Boise and ranked for the first time. Tulsa's in the American Championship game. They are at number 23, and Colorado hangs on after losing for the first time this season, falling at the hands of Utah. Let's look at 20 through 16 now. And Iowa has wrapped up the schedule at 6-2, not going to be able to play Michigan this week. Miami falls 8 spots. What do you think, Joey, as you look at Louisiana? Louisiana's only losses to Coastal Carolina. They've beaten Iowa State. Iowa State might be up at 6 this week. What do you think about where the Raging Cajuns are ranked?
I think they have a chance of being higher, but quite honestly, I think we've almost forgotten about that win against Iowa State to open up the season. I think in that first week, so much talk, but Iowa State has had so much success. Now getting into that top 10, we've sort of forgotten what Louisiana has done. They're sitting at 9-1, having a terrific season, and could be one of those teams that's screaming, we deserve more respect.
If there was a lower spot to drop Miami to after that poor performance against North Carolina Saturday, the Hurricanes might have plummeted even more. Let's continue up the rankings and look at 11 through 15. North Carolina jumps up a couple of spots. Northwestern, who will play for the Big Ten Championship against Ohio State, only lost a bad one against a poor Michigan State team. And SC's only up a couple of spots, Jesse. What do you make of that?
Yeah, there's SC, and when the first rankings came out, they were number 18, and guys, we know it's just really hard to climb the rankings when you don't play and beat ranked teams. The Trojans have gotten no help from their counterparts inside the Pac-12. Everybody's losing, and as a result, it's just really hard to envision beating a 3-2 Oregon team that didn't even win the Pac-12 North. Hard to envision the Trojans cracking the top 4 for the playoff. The Pac-12's playoff hopes are done.
Even with Colorado's loss, and in a year in which you're changing the rules, they should just let USC and Colorado play for the Pac-12 championship. They're the ones with the best records that are able to play, with Washington being unable to go. It'll be USC against Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. Or Indiana, I should say, is at number 11, still a quality win for Ohio State. The Buckeyes have a chance to get another one against Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game. Okay, let's look at the top 10 now. And sitting at number 10 is Oklahoma. David, is there a shot for the Sooners if they beat Iowa State and maybe get a little help with some upsets to somehow sneak back into the field again?
So you're saying there's a chance? Maybe? Mary Swanson's? I mean, long shot, but if you're watching Oklahoma, you should like what you're seeing. Definitely on the defensive side of the football, better than they've been in years past.
One spot ahead of the Sooners, who now moved up one spot. Cincinnati, I tell you what, Cincinnati needs to get back on the field. They've dropped a couple of spots the last couple of weeks. I'm not really sure that I love this right now, Kirk. What do you think?
Well, you're right. They're a brand that's a bit forgotten. They haven't had a chance to play, and it's affected them as far as the momentum. They had some great momentum going about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. Hopefully they'll get a chance to play this weekend and make a statement.
You guys know me. I'm not one to jump on the committee. I know that different people, different years, you talk about consistency, and when you have that many people, you're going to find some discrepancies. Cincinnati keeps dropping when they don't play. Other teams don't. Let's see who's at number 8. Cincinnati will have a chance in the American Championship game. And Georgia, despite losing its 2 most important games this year, committee loves the Bulldogs. I mean, that's certainly in Alabama's favor. It might give Alabama some leeway in the SEC Championship game, since the Crimson Tide handled the Bulldogs with ease in the regular season. And Florida also beat Georgia. Let's look at number 7, just ahead of Georgia. At 7 is Florida. Now, that was a terrible loss against LSU. Did you think the Gators would fall farther, Joey?
I absolutely did. And Rece, this entire time once we got into that top 10, I kept thinking, where the heck is Florida? Florida's sitting at number 7. They still got a shot at this thing. I assumed with losing to a 3-5 LSU team that had looked terrible, lost by 1,000,000 points to Alabama, beating Florida, I thought Florida would be much lower than this. But sitting at 7, they knock off Alabama. We got a discussion on Sunday.
All right, so we have Florida at number 7. Kirk, I thought they would fall a little bit farther, too. I did think that the floor for them had to be one spot above Georgia, which is where they are right now. I've said about Ohio State leading up to this that you can't give them everything. Same holds true for Florida. Just because they played more games, you can't lose a game like that and still be in contention for the playoff spot, even if you win the SEC, can you?
Well, I think it's how they lost that game, right? I think it was a home game and a game. It's college football. It's emotions. They looked at the film. They thought LSU would just walk in there. LSU had opt-outs. They had everything going against them. And to be candid, I think Florida just kind of, I don't want to say they just showed up, but the way the game went and the way they have looked in recent weeks, that was not the Florida team we've seen. They must be peeking ahead to Atlanta and start thinking about getting ready for Alabama. They'll be a very different team Saturday, obviously, when they play Bama, but there should be a penalty to me. I'm surprised that they only dropped one spot to number 7. And as Joey said, they're still, if there's if they win and, I don't know if winning is enough. That would be a great discussion tonight. Is winning enough now that we know they're at 7? Would that be enough? If they would have beaten LSU, Jesse, it would be a given. Now, I don't know, but dropping one spot, I think a lot of people are scratching their heads.
Well, if they beat number 1 Alabama in the SEC title game, it becomes an interesting discussion simply because an SEC champion has never been left out of the college football playoff in 6 years. Of course, a 2-loss team has never been let in. So really interesting. If they could, the way the Gators defense is played, it doesn't look like they're capable of beating Bama. They'll certainly have to show up and be ready to go much more than they were this past weekend, that's for sure.
I don't think a 2-loss team should be disqualified simply because of the number of losses. But if it comes against a team that has played the way LSU has, that's a bad loss. You have to be penalized for it. And up to this point, I'm not sure that look, final rankings, maybe they can't jump the divide and make it into the playoff. But that's a tough one to swallow. I think if they beat Alabama, the best case scenario for them is like Penn State a few years ago. They had the win over Ohio State. Ohio State still ended up going to the playoff. All right, let's look at the top of the latest college football playoff rankings. My producer, Calfman, says the most dramatic way to do this is to start at the top, and then we'll show you where we change. At number 1, we anticipate that Alabama will remain there. The Crimson Tide ran the table in the regular season in the SEC. They are 10-0. At number 2, has to be Notre Dame, right? Fighting Irish, also 10-0, off last week as they prepare for the rematch in the ACC title game that Kirk and Chris Fowler will call on Saturday afternoon from Charlotte. College Game Day will be there against Clemson, who I assume is going to be number 3. Is that correct? It is. Dabo Swinney's Tigers holding firm at number 3. So now we've got 1, 2, 3. You've got an Ohio State team that's only played 5 games. You got Iowa State that we haven't seen, and you got Texas A&M, who's also had a little bit of time off due to the coronavirus. So let's look at number 6. Iowa State, despite the loss to Louisiana, who has a better record. The Raging Cajuns with a 17-point victory over Iowa State in the opener. We like to say every game counts. Apparently that one has been mitigated. At number 5, one spot ahead of Iowa State, is Texas A&M. The Aggies also have only played 8 games. They play Tennessee this weekend. Be one game on their schedule that they were unable to make up. So hanging in at number 4 is Ohio State, with half the number of games of the 3 teams ranked in front of them and fewer games than the 2 teams directly behind them, but an opportunity to win the Big Ten championship, to have a couple of quality wins among their 6 if they're able to beat Northwestern by beating Indiana and the Wildcats, and seemingly only a win away from making it into the college football playoffs. So what's your reaction to what you see, Kirk?
I think what you just said, if Ohio State was going to drop down because of number of games, it would have been last week or this week. The reality is what it is with Ohio State, with everything that's gone on. The fact that they are sitting there at 5-0, they're able to play this weekend in Indianapolis against Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern. If they were to win that game and be crowned a Big Ten champion, they're playing. They're 60 minutes away, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. They're 60 minutes away from making it into the playoff. The question to me, David, is the other games. The game in Charlotte, what will be the results of Notre Dame and Clemson and what that potentially could do, if at all. I mean, I've heard Dabo Swinney say if Clemson loses, they're still good, that they should be in, even with 2 losses. I think we all agree that if Notre Dame were to lose, that both of those teams would probably be in. So I think I know you love chaos. You like Armageddon. What do you think of what we have, and what's your favorite Armageddon situation coming up next weekend?
I do love some chaos. I think if you have Notre Dame beat Clemson, let's let the fun begin. I mean, I think it would be outstanding just to see what happens next because, 4 out of the last 6 years, number 5 has made it into the college football playoff. It's not a horrible spot to be in if you're Texas A&M. So, listen, I think that Notre Dame, how they lose will be interesting to see how they judge if they lost. But Clemson losing throws in a scenario where it would just be fun. There'd be a lot of discussion, and it's going to be a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, and what you like best, Joey.
It gets interesting to me, Kirk. And you mentioned that Dabo said, thinks that they should be in even if they lose. Well, if you look at Florida's situation, and Florida just fell 1 spot and losing to a 3-win LSU team, if Clemson goes on and loses to Notre Dame, which is number 2 in the country for a second time, gives them 2 losses, why would they assume that they're going to fall more than 1 spot, which is exactly what Florida did? On the other side of it, if I'm Cincinnati, I'm really upset right now. I'm really not happy about the fact that we've fallen a spot each week after not playing, and it's not their fault. And so as we have all these discussions about teams not playing versus teams playing 5 games, how many games you get in, it seems as if some teams are being punished for not playing football games and some teams are not. And so if I'm one of the little guys, if I'm Cincinnati and I'm always scratching and clawing to be considered one of the big boys, I look at this and what's going on and say, look, this is not fair. We're being punished for not playing and it's not our fault.
Joey, I think my biggest takeaway from this past weekend was that 2 spots are now taken. Bama's been number 1, every ranking coming out. After beating Arkansas, they're going to get in no matter what, even if they lose to Florida. They're not going to move them off the number 1 spot outside the top 4, even with a loss against the Gators. And I think with the Gators losing to LSU, that really helped out Notre Dame. Last week, I thought that if a situation came up where a 1-loss Florida would have beaten Alabama and Ohio State looked really good in their Big Ten title game against Northwestern. If Clemson blew Notre Dame out, there was a chance maybe the Irish would drop out of the top 4. But after UNC pummeled then number 10 Miami this past weekend, and the Gators lost against LSU. You take a look, Kirk, at Notre Dame's resume right now. Those wins against Clemson and against UNC, that's really impressive in the committee's eyes. And even if they were to lose, and maybe even lose by 20-plus points against Clemson this upcoming weekend, I still think, Kirk, their resume stacks up well against what could be a 6-0 Big Ten champion Ohio State or even an 8-1 Texas A&M.
One thing I just wanted to add real quick before Rece hops back in, I just wanted to say that if whether it's right or wrong, there's a perception with Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State that they are the better teams and better programs in college football. And if the shoe were on the other foot, and Alabama, let's say, played 5 games, or Clemson played 5 games, and the 5 games that they played, they looked dominant. And then they were going to go off into their conference championship and go have a chance to win their conference and play 6 games. I would guarantee you that they would be facing the same situation that Ohio State is facing. So you can say that's unfair. The committee's trying to put the best 4 teams in the playoff. And that's where this subjective analysis, I think, is very frustrating for a lot of people. I don't want to say it's a different set of rules, but it's a different perception based on the equity that Alabama and Nick Saban, what Urban Meyer and now Ryan Day's done at Ohio State, and what Dabo Swinney has created at Clemson, because Ohio State was 1-0, Rece, and the AP had them at number 3 in the country. So there's a consensus that they're an elite team. It just comes down to the amount of games. But if Clemson and Alabama had that same scenario, they would also be getting that benefit.
Yes. That's true, but those aren't mutually exclusive. That there's no false dilemma there. They would be getting that benefit, but it would also be fair to question them. And I'll go ahead and say it, there is a different set of rules. Now, maybe because those teams are so good and pass the test, the eye test or the football judgment test or whatever you want to call it, maybe that's as it should be. But I think the thing beyond Ohio State, who I've had ranked number 3 in the AP poll and still do, and I think they can win the national championship. I think the thing below it is what Joey's talking about. I think the frustrating thing is Cincinnati slipping and the infatuation with Iowa State, which is a really good team, but they have a significant blemish to a team that is also ranked well below them with a better record, who, you know, haven't looked as good at times as others. But all those things that we'll get into with Gary Barta, also talk about why Ohio State looks one way and USC looks another with a similar number of games, although I too think that's appropriate. This is what we're looking forward to in Charlotte this weekend. I love this show. I get to get on a soapbox and nobody can tell me to stop talking. Tigers and Irish Part 2 coming up from Charlotte, the ACC Championship game, and the chairman of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Gary Barta. We have some questions. He will have some answers when you come back. College Football Playoff Top 25.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by AT&T 5G. You're watching College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by AT&T 5G.
You're just joining us. The latest top 6 from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Top 4 remains the same. Top 5 remains the same. Iowa State has moved into number 6. Cyclones playing for the Big 12 championship and maybe with a puncher's chance to sneak in. Florida just behind at number 7 as we are joined by the chairman of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Gary Barta, also the athletic director at Iowa. Gary, let's start where a lot of the discussion is centered the last couple of weeks with Ohio State. In the committee's judgment, why has Ohio State, and really even Texas A&M, though they haven't missed as many games as Ohio State, why have those two been able to hold their positions and teams like Cincinnati have slipped in the standings?
This week is certainly unique, Rece, in that 12 of the 25 teams ranked did not play, and in the top 6, 5 of those teams didn't play. So when it comes to Ohio State and Texas A&M, there was some discussion in that 1 through 5, but really not a lot of discussion of moving anybody. When it comes to Cincinnati, you know, the committee has shown appreciation for Cincinnati from the beginning. We haven't had a chance to watch them play since November 21st, and the teams around them, the teams ahead of them, have played 2 or 3 games that we've been able to evaluate. And one of the things that holds Cincinnati back, again, a great team, they don't have a win against a top 25. So the teams, Iowa State was idle, Cincinnati was idle, a lot of teams in that top 10 that didn't play this week, which created some challenges in evaluation, but not a lot of movement.
Understanding, and I agree with, a head-to-head result, particularly early in the season, can't be the be-all, end-all. But there's a pretty wide gap between how the committee is ranking Iowa State and the team that they lost to, Louisiana. How would you describe the reasons for that? Why is there such a gap between those two when Louisiana, granted from a smaller conference, probably not the same overall schedule, but they beat them decisively and they have a better record?
Yeah, when you look at Iowa State, one of the things that happened along the way, they beat a highly ranked Oklahoma team. They also beat 20th ranked Texas. They're leading the Big 12. The committee kept watching that defense and that offense improve. They have the leading rusher in the country. And so the appreciation for Iowa State is related to that. As it relates to Louisiana, a terrific team, they did beat Iowa State. And you know, the committee certainly gives them credit for that. Their loss was to Coastal Carolina. They'll have an opportunity to play Coastal again in the Sun Belt, 2 really good Sun Belt teams. But what Iowa State has done since that loss, it's more to say, it says more about that than it does about Louisiana's play.
I think that most everyone that looks at this objectively would say the top 4 teams that you have are the 4 best teams. They are the 4 most powerful teams, and while Ohio State hasn't had as many opportunities, they've looked terrific when they've played. But if there are upsets this weekend, how would you describe the opportunity for an undefeated Cincinnati or an undefeated Coastal Carolina with couple solid wins on the resume? And Cincinnati would get a victory over a team that's currently ranked if they beat Tulsa. How would you describe the gap that they would have to cover to be able to make it into the playoff as opposed to just a New Year's Six game?
Well, we have 10 championships coming up. I hope we get an opportunity to play all of them because is always the case. It's ranked teams against ranked teams. And so we're going to have 10 new games to put into the mix and to evaluate. I'm not going to speculate on how it all might come out, but this is a weekend. One of the reasons that it's so exciting is we get to see 10 matchups against teams, all of whom are ranked. I think all of them are ranked, and it should be an exciting weekend.
Based on the discussion in the committee room, Gary, the two teams at the top, Alabama and Notre Dame, are they viewed as being, maybe along with Clemson, are those teams viewed as being significantly ahead, both in accomplishment and in football judgment, where they might have some leeway this weekend?
Alabama is undefeated. I mentioned earlier in the top 6 there was only one team that played this week. They beat Arkansas 52-3. Offense, defense, special teams. They're just from top to bottom. They're a fantastic team. Notre Dame also undefeated, and their defense has really impressed the committee. Ian Book got better and better as the year went along, and so watching the ACC championship, watching that game between Notre Dame and Clemson, I know I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure the committee is as well.
And we're certainly looking forward to it as well, Gary. I'm also looking forward to chatting with you on Sunday when the final College Football Playoff Selection Committee rankings come out. We find out which 4 teams make it into the College Football Playoff. Always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, there is Gary Barta, who is put in the difficult situation to answer those questions for the 13 committee members who get together and come up with these rankings. And it's not done in a traditional form where you just list 1 through 25. They vote for them in groups, and sometimes that creates a little bit of movement. Probably have seen a result of that with Cincinnati's slip the last couple of weeks. Now, as you know, the college football playoff semifinals are scheduled to be played on New Year's Day in the Rose Bowls and the Sugar Bowls. Now, in the Sugar Bowl, you'll be able to have fans. That is not the case right now in the Rose Bowl. And just a little while ago, the executive director of the college football playoff, Mr. Bill Hancock, issued this statement. He says, at this moment, College Football Playoff looks forward to playing one of the 2 semifinal playoff games at the Rose Bowl as scheduled. As we move forward with our planning, we continue to hope that the Rose Bowl's appeal to government officials to allow the families of student athletes to attend will be permitted. Just as student athlete families will be welcomed at the Sugar Bowl, the other New Year's 6 games, and the championship game in Miami. Statement goes on to read this way. Given the vast space inside the Rose Bowl Stadium, we are confident that if families were able to attend, they could do so in a safe and socially distant manner. For many families, this will be the last chance they have to see their sons play college football. We understand that under California's COVID-19 protocols, fans in general will not be able to attend. We hope the small number of families who want to attend will not be prohibited from doing so. That is the end of the statement. Very important, perhaps, to note the first phrase in this statement at this moment. Tigers and Irish Part 2. ACC championship game coming up in Charlotte. A little historical perspective when you come back.
What else to say except thanks? We're going to football. What a day.
College game day from Charlotte, Clemson, and Notre Dame. Second time they've met this year as top 5 opponents. Double overtime thriller in South Bend. Tigers going to be closer to full strength. Trevor Lawrence is going to play. They hope James Skalski, some other defenders get back. Unlike that first meeting, Lawrence missed the first game after suffering from the coronavirus. This type of rematch really hasn't seen very often since the AP Polo era started in 1936. Just the 4th time. The previous 3, first game close, second game the loser won in a blowout. No teams have met 3 times in a single season since 1909. Now the stage could be set for that if Clemson were to win and both Clemson and Notre Dame make it into the playoff. We know this on Saturday, a great showdown between quarterbacks. Kirk talked to both of them.
To be honest, almost nationally an eye roll when people bring up a Notre Dame. Like, they're overrated. Do the players feel that?
We talk about it a lot. I mean, it's a lot of noise outside of our building that, we can't control. But before we were in a conference, you got to win every game if you want to go to the playoff. There's no no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I kind of like it, and I think our team likes it. Just use that as fuel, And we got to win every game. We want to win every game, and we believe that we can compete and make it to the playoffs and go win a national championship.
For a team that likes a chip on their shoulder, that's got to be cranking right now this week.
It's just a good reminder, we're not guaranteed to win. You really just have to take it week by week, and you gotta give it everything you have every week. You can't take a week off.
What a game it's going to be on ABC Saturday, 4 o'clock Eastern Time. Clemson and Notre Dame, ACC Championship, playoff berth. I believe potentially the Heisman Trophy could be influenced greatly. If not, the leader emerged from that game. Trevor Lawrence maybe making a late surge, or Ian Book that David has advocated for. 4 o'clock Eastern Time. Tigers and the Fighting Irish for the second time this year. The Pac-12 championship game, a little bit unusual. Washington can't play because of COVID protocol, so it'll be Oregon taking on undefeated USC. The Trojans up to number 13 in the latest playoff rankings, but not getting near the type of respect that Ohio State does. Here's SC Athletic Director Mike Bowman.
Well, obviously, I think their brand and their recent performance certainly helps them immensely. I mean, coming to SC after spending 6 years in the state of Ohio at the University of Cincinnati, I get a good sense of what their prowess is and the way they've accomplished so many different things. So, my hat's off to them. I've competed against them from numerous institutions, and I understand that. I think that's why Friday's a big opportunity for us. I really do. I mean, when you start comparing some of the different power indexes and so forth, we'll see how that shakes out. But our focus right now is on Friday.
And that's exactly where it should be, as the Trojans can win a Pac-12 championship, and that means something. But for the purpose of our discussion, we talk playoff here. Now, USC has the same record as Ohio State, but in my judgment, they're not close to the same teams. SC's had to pull a couple games out of the fire. One of them against a very poor opponent, the other two against very average opponents. You look at this now, and big brands do get the benefit of the doubt, Kirk, and if USC had been dominant, I think they might have gotten some of the benefit of the doubt that Ohio State has gotten, but they haven't looked the same. You look at the two teams play, and Ohio State has controlled its games in a far greater manner than the Trojans have.
Yeah, people bring up eye test, and you can use eye test or you can actually use metrics. I mean, you can look at the efficiency. It favors Ohio State considerably, is what you just said. Game control favors Ohio State considerably. The strength of schedules is in favor of USC. Neither one is great, but the difference is the way Ohio State has played. Ohio State, they've had huge leads on some teams and have allowed teams to come back, and they still are up very high as far as game control. So I think that's the biggest difference. That and Joey, the team that was coming in. You know how you're not supposed to look at teams before the season starts, but with the team that Ohio State had last year and a lot of those players coming back, I think Ohio State had a lot of momentum coming into this year, and I don't think they've done necessarily anything to diminish that based on the games that they played in.
No, and it's always interesting to me, and we've always had discussions about, at times you don't control your schedule. And especially in this season, you had zero control over your schedule. So if you're going to play an Arizona State team that is now sitting at 1-2, you can't have tipped passes at the end to find a way to beat them by 1 point. That was the moment when all of a sudden it was like, USC might not be as good as we thought. And then they play Arizona the next week, who is now sitting at 0-5. And it was a 4-point victory. Again, very close at the end. And then this past weekend, to win the game at the end against an average UCLA team, it just opens your eyes to say, look, you're undefeated, but you haven't made the statements that we needed to see to get you into this conversation. Ohio State has made those statements besides the very close game to Indiana, which was a top 10 team at the time. So the difference is when you watch these two teams play, it's not just the 5-0 record at the end, it's how you arrived at 5-0 that has hurt USC.
No doubt. Who you've played, who you've beaten is obviously a big stipulation with the committee. I think USC's 5-0 and their 5 opponents have a combined 7 wins. If you watched the UCLA game last week, I think if you watch that and they play that game again, you might favor UCLA. So I don't think it's a bias. I think it's fair. I think USC on defense, you question them on defense. On offense, you've had moments where you've questioned them as well. So I think they're a really good football team. I would love to have seen them play more games against competitive folks, but they've played a less than desirable schedule and they haven't looked great. So that's not something that you're going to say, oh, man, we need to be fighting for them to put them in the top 5, put them in the top 6. It's not at that point, Jesse.
Yeah, David, I think it's just as simple as Ohio State's a better team and they're playing in a better conference. And you guys have alluded to the game control and how dominant they've been. Consider that Ohio State probably played their C- game against Indiana, a team the committee has ranked, I think, 11 right now. And they were winning that game 35-7 before things started getting weird. And you guys have talked about how USC has had to come back in 3 of their games. It's not just us saying this, by the way. The committee, in their very first college football playoff ranking, had Ohio State at 4, and they had USC at number 18. Now, I said it at the beginning of the show, it doesn't help USC when you're not playing anybody that's ranked, and that's on the Pac-12. I also think from a committee standpoint, you're not supposed to evaluate what's happened in the past, but I do think in some people's subconscious, they remember seeing USC give up 49 points against Iowa in the Holiday Bowl just this past season, a Big Ten team. So I think all of that plays into why Ohio State is ranked so much higher than USC at this point.
Hey, look, I think USC is dangerous on offense. I would have loved to have seen them have that opportunity they originally had scheduled against Alabama in the season opener. And, you know, people say, well, why aren't you giving them credit for the victories? In my estimation, we are, because we're having this discussion, right? We're having the discussion as to why their record is not giving them the same place that Ohio State has attained. And the reason is because they won the game. So they're getting credit for it, and they deserve it. It's not easy to win, and USC's been able to do that without blemish so far, and they have a chance to win a conference championship as well. So what does the Bear think? The Bear looks stern right now, Herbie. I think he's upset with me questioning Iowa State. I love the clones, Bear. I'm just, you know, I've got questions. That's all.
Sport coat looking good.
25. Presented by AT&T 5G.
It all comes down to this. 4 teams, 1 championship. Time to find out who's in. The College Football Playoff Selection Show, Sunday at noon Eastern on ESPN.
That is always such a blast. We'll see the rankings when you do. We don't get a sneak peek. Some notes from this latest edition of the rankings. Alabama number 1 again, but no top-ranked team in the penultimate, next to last rankings has ever gone on to win the title. Clemson, highest-ranked 1-loss team. No 2-loss team has ever made the 4-team playoff. And unprecedented stability at the top. Top 4, the same 4 straight weeks. That's the longest stretch of the college football playoff era. And Texas A&M, Iowa State, and Florida just behind as the guys return. And Chris Felica has joined us now. So, Bear, let's start with the team sitting just on the outside. Iowa State at number 6, Florida at number 7. You look at those 2 teams, I'd probably favor them to beat the group of 5 contenders, Cincinnati or Coastal Carolina. But is it fair to say that given the setup and the way the committee looks at things, that if you think the group of 5 team has a chance to get into the playoff, it's probably not going to happen under this system?
No, you would think that if it would happen in any year, it would be this year with the number of the fact. I think the fact that people see 3 2-loss Power 5 teams ahead of Cincinnati and Coastal Carolina, that's the problem. I think you can make a great case right. Look, I get why people are outraged at Cincinnati being ranked where they are. I'm more outraged that Cincinnati is ahead of Coastal Carolina right now. I think if you look at Coastal's wins against BYU, Louisiana, Appalachian State, and I know Kansas isn't good, but it's still a Power 5 win, they've got a heck of a lot stronger resume than Cincinnati does right now. And I think you look at the efficiency ratings, and they're kind of comparable. But I think Iowa State here is a team that a lot of people are really scratching their head about. And look, I get they have 2 losses, and I get they lost by 17 to Louisiana, and there were circumstances in that game. There was a touchdown with 10 seconds left. There were 3 non-offensive touchdowns in the game. Charlie Kohler didn't play. It did happen, though. But I think people have this assumption that, like, Iowa State's like this garbage team. If you go back since Halloween, Iowa State has a higher overall team efficiency rating than Notre Dame does. They're right there with Clemson, like a couple of decimal points behind. The only teams ahead of Iowa State in terms of scoring margin since Halloween are Alabama and Oklahoma. This is not like some team that's just squeaking by and they really aren't getting. Again, you have to remember they lost to Oklahoma State, they lost to Louisiana. But if you look at their performance later in the year, like Gary Barter was talking about the way they're playing and that they've been dominating teams, that's probably what they're looking at.
Bear, usually we throw you in the corner on the game day set. You got a sweatshirt on and a hoodie, and now you got a pocket square. You got the sport coat on the Tuesday night show. You step it up a notch. Just like you're saying about Iowa State. I want to throw Oklahoma at you. Oklahoma is a team. I happened to see them a few weeks ago against Oklahoma State, and I called Lincoln after the game and I said, man, I think you're better right now as a complete team than you were last year, the year before that, because of the way their defense is playing and the way this Rattler kid has really grown up. So where they were early in the year, keep in mind, you lose CeeDee Lamb, the best receiver. You lose your top backs. You lose your quarterback, Jalen Hurts. You're breaking in some new offensive linemen. They had big leads on Kansas State. They ended up not being able to hold on. They had a lead against Kansas State, couldn't hold on. They have a chance to avenge that loss to Iowa State. If they were to win and look good doing it, could you say the same thing about Oklahoma, even though they're way down at 10? If there's chaos up above them, why not Oklahoma if you're saying the same thing about Iowa State?
I would agree with it. It seems, just from being at 10, it seems like it would be too high of a jump in my book. But you're right. And I think one thing that I'm looking forward to this weekend is, like, Oklahoma's defense, like you've talked about, has played better. But you look at the last three opponents. It was Oklahoma State when Spencer Sanders got hurt. It was Baylor. It was Kansas. So now they face a much more dynamic Iowa State offensive team with Breece Hall and Purdy and those receivers have been playing better. But you're right. If Oklahoma were to pick up a win over the team that the committee's ranking 6th right now, and they're a conference champ, that's ultimately going to. This is the situation we're talking about. The only way this comes into play is if Clemson were to lose against Notre Dame. I think everybody's assuming that Clemson's going to beat Notre Dame, and we're not going to be there. But if Clemson were to lose to Notre Dame again, you're looking at the pool of eligible teams there. Well, not eligible, but you've got the one-loss A&M team who's not a conference champion. You've got a 2-loss Clemson team who's not a conference champion. You've got a 2-loss Big 12 team who's a conference champion. And you've got Cincinnati, or a 2-loss Florida that's not a conference champion, or a 3-loss Florida, I should say. They would be out of it. So, it's a weird year, and I am curious to see if we do get that second Notre Dame upset of Clemson, what ultimately happens.
So two things, Bear. One, Coastal Carolina 100% deserves to be above Cincinnati. I'm sorry. They've played now 11 games. They have at least 2 better wins than Cincinnati. That needs to be a point that needs to be made for the New Year's Six conversation. And 2, we don't even talk about A&M. It's literally like A&M's not even there at 5. Are they still 5? Is my monitor off? Does anybody ever even mention A&M? Are they allowed? Are they in the playoff discussion, or do we just need to take them out of the mix?
Well, I initially thought that they were kind of a placeholder because I didn't necessarily see LSU's upset win over Florida coming. And now that happened, A&M is in the mix. But I think the one thing to keep in mind with the committee, and I don't know what the conversations are behind those closed doors in the committee room walls there, the only way A&M is going to get in is at number 4. I will likely play Alabama at number 1. We saw that game already this year. I don't think we want to see that game again. Would the committee does that conversation come up? Do we want to avoid the rematch with A&M and Alabama? I don't think it should. I think if the committee feels A&M is the 4th best team in the country, they should make the playoff. But I think there would be a conversation do we give another team a chance? I mean, whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But I think that's an interesting dynamic to see whether we would get that Alabama A&M second meeting this year.
Well, Bear, I think one thing that the committee's made obvious, and they keep talking about it, is the more games you play, the more opportunities you have to impress the committee. And I think that's why we keep seeing teams like Iowa State and Georgia creep up the list. I agree with what Bear's saying about Iowa State. They are a much improved team. Teams get better and they get worse. 45-0 Kansas State, 42-6 or something against a good West Virginia team. The way they run the ball, their scheme on offense and their defense, and Brock Purdy making better decisions has made them a better looking team. JT Daniels has been a total difference for Georgia since he's taken over as well. I do agree with Cincinnati still being ranked ahead of Coastal Carolina though, Joey, and that's just an eye test thing for me. I think both offenses are good. I know Coastal Carolina has a better resume right now, but to me, Cincinnati's defense far superior to what we've seen from Coastal Carolina. So I understand why Cincinnati's upset, out of sight, out of mind, and they're slipping. But I think where they got those two group of 5 teams right now, I'm okay with.
I absolutely agree with you on the Cincinnati thing. I don't even think that's close. When we look at Cincinnati and their defense and what Luke Fickell and Marcus Freeman has done there, their defense might be better than every team ahead of them in the way they play, the different styles they run of their defense with the 3-4 and everything they do. I think they're really good. It's interesting to me, though, Rece, when you're talking to Mr. Barta earlier about Iowa State, and he mentioned a win over a highly ranked Oklahoma team. That Oklahoma team was 1-2, coming on their second loss after getting beat to Kansas State early in the season when Iowa State beat them. So it's always interesting to me how we view these wins and losses by these teams, how they view a Coastal Carolina that just won on the last second against a Troy team last weekend. It's always interesting how they look at these things, the respect they give some of these teams for wins that may have happened early in a season where we believe that Louisiana isn't getting the same respect for the win over Iowa State because it's the opening week, but then Iowa State's getting the respect of beating an Oklahoma team that had just lost to Kansas State the week before. So it's all really interesting the way the committee looks at these things.
Let me be clear. Louisiana has escaped a lot in their games, but they've won the games. Iowa State looks like the much better team right now, but that just seems like a pretty wide gulf. And as for the Cincinnati Coastal discussion, that's important because remember, the highest ranked group of 5 champion makes it into a New Year's 6 game. That would be something that's out there for both Cincinnati and Coastal Carolina if they were to be champions of their respective conferences. That's the way the top 6 right now looks. And hey, look, Iowa State's really good right now. Nobody's disputing that. We just wonder if they're deserving of number 6.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by AT&T 5G.
Let's take a quick look at the All-State Playoff Predictor. You see the percentage chance of making the playoff. I want to point out the predictor forecasts the final playoff selection committee selection based on the committee's past behavior. A little bit of a quirk this year, obviously, with a few number of games being played in some quarters, and that was responsible for some of those numbers. Final rankings come out Sunday, noon Eastern. We will be here to see them when you do and to debate them as we always have. For Kirk, David, Joey, and Jesse, and the Bear in his sports coat, I'm Rece. We'll see you later.